Welcome back to the Copado Architect Corner. Today we're going to talk about what are back promotions, or otherwise known as back deploys, and why are they important. Welcome back to the Copado Architect Corner. We're here to talk about deployment and DevOps. So in past videos, we've talked about what is a Salesforce environment. We've talked about what is a Salesforce pipeline. And the purpose of the pipeline is for your developers to be doing their development. Then you want to go through certain tests and processes, like making sure that it's complete, it has all the test code coverage, everything works, and then you want to move it forward along the pipeline and eventually make it to production where it can be used. That's the whole purpose. Now, when you have more than one environment, then you need to worry, and you start pushing down a pipeline, there are other branches of the tree which are used by different developers and for different purposes. And so you do need to be aware that you need to be bringing these assets actually backwards through your pipeline, not just forward, but backwards, sometimes called back promotions or called back deploys. And in fact, they're a very important concept in development. And if you neglect them, you can really be setting yourself up for some significant issues down the road. So I'm going to walk in, I'm going to show you basic scenarios going forward. And then I'm going to show you how you need to be doing back promotions or back deploys to keep your environments healthy. And I'm going to show you how that can affect on a single team or eventually a multi-team environment. Now I like to start with this diagram because this shows you the essence of what a single org Salesforce configuration can be. With Salesforce, communities, you could have pages for internal users, pages for community users, anonymous pages for web to lead, web to case, all the way to integrations. So there's a lot going on, and there are a lot of different metadata assets that are being modified. So I'm going to work on building this diagram up. So I'm going to have 3 developers. Each have been issued their own dev sandbox. Now, there are different schools of thought as to whether developers should share a sandbox or have separate sandboxes. But we're going to be on this approach, which is a separate sandbox, one for developer 1, one for developer 2, one for developer 3. And developer 1 is assigned to build the search page LWC and the search controller. And so that developer builds the search page LWC, and then they build the search controller, and then as part of their process, they're going to do what's called creating a user story in Copado. And this could be, relevant for other deployment environments, but they're going to figure out a way to group these together. And this user story in Copado will then be linked to these particular assets. So this user story will be connected through what's called the commit. And so now we've got this user story has these 2 assets. And then what's going to happen is this user story is then promoted up to dev-in. So what that means is when I promote the dev-in, then the search page and the search controller will be brought by Copado into dev-in. And that is a good thing. Now what's going to happen is in a separate sandbox, developer 2 was assigned building the search service. And so this is a service that can actually perform the search and, let's say, make a call out to an external service. So what's going to happen is there'll be another user story created by this developer, and it'll be linked to these assets, the search service. Now, then what's going to happen is then this user story is then deployed up here. So we'll call this user story 1, and this will be user story 2. So what's actually happening is Copado is connected to these orgs and is pulling the data into the Git repo. And then Copado is then triggering the deployment of dev-in. We'll be going over this in much more detail in subsequent videos. But just for the sake of this conversation, story 1 and story 2 are brought into dev-in, and now all 3 of these items coexist. And this is a good thing. This is the whole purpose of having separate development and then merging together in a dev environment. The challenge is that this search controller may need to call the search service. So if it doesn't exist in Dev 1, then what's going to happen is we need to get this search service into Dev 1's environment so they can work on it. So in that case, we need to do a back promotion. We need to take user story 2 and we need to back promote or back deploy it into Dev 1. And by doing so, Now, all three of these elements, and now the search controller can be recoded or enhanced to call the search service. So what we had to do is we had user story 1 was created in dev 1, user story 2 was created in dev 2, and then I had to promote 2 to dev int, and then do a back promote to bring it over into dev 1 so that dev 1 has all three. Now, this developer who made the search service may want to be able to call the screens also. And all they have is a service. All they have is the backend Apex class. They want to be able to press the buttons and do the search. So they need to do a back deploy user story 1 into dev 2, which would then give them the other two. Now, I mentioned the word button. There might be a different developer who's responsible for the Lightning page layouts and assigning the buttons. And so maybe that developer is the one that wants to create the button, and they don't have any of these on here. So then they need a back deploy of user story 1 and user story 2 brought into their environment. So that way they can get the three assets, the search service, Hearst controller, and the search page. So then their button can be used to trigger it. So this way, their button could trigger the search service on not the blob page, but we'll call this the Lightning page. Now what I'm showing you is that you split the work up, 3 different developers, 3 different sandboxes. And the reason why they wait to go to dev int is you want to make sure that these are in a reasonable place of completion. They don't throw errors. So if this search page, search controller threw a bunch of errors, then you would not want to bring it and destabilize dev 2 or dev 3. So we're waiting for them to reach a certain level of maturity. They pass basic unit testing, they go to dev int, and then they bring and come back. And then the same way for the button. Now you might say, this is forcing me to develop serially, meaning one, then the next, then the next. What you could do is create some stubs, an empty search service that has just the API, agree upon it at the beginning, and then create a baseline story for that. So you could do a beginning service, deploy it back, and then start layering your code. So these are strategies that your dev teams can take in order to start deciding how we're going to move things forward. But what you really want to do is in separate environments, there is going to be a significant amount of user story movement in amongst dev 1, dev 2, dev 3, the 3 separate devs going to dev. And then when all the stories accumulate, let's assume it took a story 3 here to add the button. Let's assume there was no need for bug fixes, enhancements. Everything went beautifully. This user story, I'm going to move this little IDE. We'll talk about that in a minute. So this user story 3 contains the button, and now it's made it over to here. And now over here, we're going to have the Lightning page layout and the button. So all 3 of these have made it through 3 separate user stories done by 3 developers, potentially in parallel, depending on how you set up the stubs and then did the synchronization. You could have had this done relatively quickly. 3 user stories each need to back promote across the dev teams. So when you have multiple developers in a sandbox, back promotions need to be something you are doing daily or sometimes even more often, bringing things back. Now you might do selective back promotions. I might not want to bring all the work product of dev 2 and dev 3 into one. I just might want to bring the one user story that represents the search service that I need. So you can have selective back promotions, or you could just at the start of a sprint week, I'm a developer, I've done my work, I'm in dev 3, I might say, get me up to date with everything that the rest of the team's been doing. So I might have clear out any back promotions in dev 3 and bring me up to sync. So this is really important in getting this sense of why back promotions can be very important when you're on this separate developer, dev 1, dev 2, dev 3, and how you're going to send forward to come back. So if we take a look here, we're going to have a standard pipeline, multiple devs. I'm showing 3. There could easily be 5 or more. And I'm showing you that all of this activity is happening. Dev 1's promoting to dev int, back promoting to 2, and so on. All of this activity is happening, could be happening many times a day among a very active dev team, or definitely at the beginning of a week when you're doing work. Once this accumulates, and they accumulate in dev int, they pass, then you send them in more of a complete state to QA. They'll work their way to stage and then to production. Now let's start addressing this with two teams. And what we showed before is the dual team pipeline. So I'm going to have team A. And as I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of activity going on right here. And they're going to have a lot of intra-project stories being back promoted between A and being promoted. Now we reach a point where team A has traversed QA. And by representing these user stories, I'm representing the user stories being promoted to Copado and all the associative metadata and deployment elements. And then they make it into stage. So now Teams A's user stories are in stage and eventually make it to production. The challenge is that Team B is still developing, and they actually might either need some of the new components or because they might be overlapping them. Let's say that page with the button. They might be wanting to make changes to that same page, put a different button, or they might have a dependency where they need to call that new service. So what's going to need to happen is while these stories have moved forward, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give these a color. We might need to back deploy them to QA because that we might need to find if there's any conflicts with Team B colliding in QA. And then eventually Team B is going to need the full amount of assets brought backward into their environments. So what we have is we have this forward movement of the user stories on forward promotions. Let me put a little arrow here to show what we're doing. And then we're going to need a backward motion, the back deploy, the back promote down this separate branch. So this is the back promotion. Now, they could be on very different cadences. So within a single team, I'm showing you that there is a lot of cross activity almost at the day level. They're tight communication, common shared code base, and they have a very shared deadline. Now, when you come to the dual team environment, they have very different deadlines. They have very different stabilities and test cycles. So you're going to need to decide on a controlled manner, when will we take back deploy of team A and bring it into B, and how far back do we go? B, dev int, all the way back to the dev ones. So that is it. Whenever you have multiple team development, you're going to need to be synchronizing this. And then it gets even more fun when you have a complex pipeline with user stories from A, user stories from B, and now user stories from C. So now your challenge as the release manager and the planning is you need to be doing your back deploys among the devs. You need to be knowing when you're going to, especially here, when they're going to be sharing a UAT, bring back the team in A and B user stories and associated metadata and deployments with them. And then you need to be looking at the cadence and timing of C and say, when does C get A and B updates? And a real challenge we'll be talking about in future talks is what if C is sitting there for a few months before they deploy? They could be falling very far behind. They are having assets which are very far back in time compared to production. And so you could really be penting up a lot of backlog of work if you don't watch for the back deploys. So back deploys are a natural consequence of having separate environments with either for separate developers and having me be able to share Dev 1, share their work with Dev 2, and share their work with Dev 3, work together. Now, we don't want to be in the same environment because we may step on each other's toes and other reasons, but we do need to coordinate the passing of assets, metadata components, as they reach a certain level of maturity. They get signed, they work, they're tested, but their test code coverage, and then we want to pass them off. That's within the team. So that's team level back deploys. Multiple times a day sometimes, many times a week, and almost do all your back deploys before you start a new block of work amongst your team. When you have team A, team B, now you got to decide who's about to go into stage. And if I'm going to stage as team A and B's going to follow along, we don't want them pushing to stage and then we collide and find problems. So if A has made it to stage, B has to do its back deploys long before it thinks it's going to push to stage also. So this A-B coordination could be 5 teams, not just 2. So that needs to be worked out. And then when you add the team C that's sitting for a while, they really need to be thinking about those back deploys. So these are really a consequence of your success. You're making a lot of changes. You're fixing a lot of issues. You're building a lot of things. How do the other environments keep up with you? So back deploys are a good thing. You just need to build them in on the daily or weekly level with the team, with back between two teams, and really watch that third team that tends to fall behind because they have a longer extended schedule. So in the game of deployments, sometimes you have to level up by moving back. I heard this in the movie Ready Player One. Sometimes you want to go backwards. So to go forward, sometimes you have to go backwards. And in the case of software development, you always need to be going backwards. Hope this was helpful. Join me on the Copado YouTube channel and have a great day.